Tonight on America's Hope, we honor the men and women who serve in the United States military. It's military appreciation right here on America's Hope, which starts right now. Good evening from the NTD Global Headquarters in New York. I'm Kelly Wright, and this is America's Hope. Very special week that Americans are encountering. It's Military Appreciation Week as we lead up to Memorial Day weekend. Now, a lot of people will go out to enjoy Memorial Day weekend, which is great. You'll go out and have parties and barbecues. You'll even go to the swimming pools that officially open up for the start of summer. The bottom line, though, is that Memorial Day, from a more somber standpoint, is to honor the men and women who have served in harm's way. And some of them, many of them, making the ultimate sacrifice. They give their all in order to protect all of the Americans who find themselves living in a place of freedom. Freedom to bicker with each other politically, freedom to be divided, freedom to be partisan. But tonight we'll focus on the freedom to be free and honor each other as brothers and sisters in this great experiment called America. Let's get started. And so my first guest tonight is Captain Retired John Arroyo. He's a man who knows what it's like to serve in harm's way, and he's also a man who understands how division and how mental illness can cause much heartbreak and pain even amongst members of the United States military. We're going to retell his heroic story, his story that will inspire you to understand how we collectively can come together to help each other. He saw that firsthand at Fort Hood, Texas, when he became a victim of a mass shooting. We want to thank, by the way, CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network, for sharing some excerpts of their story as we tell the incredible, remarkable story of Captain John Arroyo. Watch this.
My friend calls me and she said, "Did you know there's a shooting?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, don't tell me John was shot." 30 minutes later, his captain shows up at the door. I went numb. And he's on the other side knocking and knocking. I'm shaking my head no because I don't want to hear it. But he's... Open the door. Open the door. He's alive.
Angel's husband, platoon leader John Arroyo, was rushed to Darnall Army Medical Center, where two surgeons immediately began operating to save his life. They soon discovered that a .45 caliber bullet had severed John's jugular vein and lodged deep within the nerves of his right shoulder. One of the physicians was ENT Dr. Alex McKinley.
Close proximity gunshot wound to the neck with an expanding hematoma is a grave prognosis. We knew that it was go time. We made an incision over the area to try to control the bleeding. Once we stopped that, we exhaled a bit, but there was still bright red bleeding, and so there was additional injuries. We looked and we knew that the bullet had gone through his what's called voice box, the area where your Adam's apple essentially is in your vocal cords, shattered his thyroid cartilage, and we knew that there was probably some significant damage to that area of his neck.
To help John breathe, doctors inserted a tracheostomy tube in his neck. Then, Angel was finally able to see him.
They took me back there. It was not my husband. His head was bigger than a basketball. His tongue was sticking out. It wouldn't even go back in. I just kept praying that everything would be okay.
The following day, John was placed in a medically induced coma and transferred to Scott and White Memorial Hospital for additional care. There, doctors told Angel their prognosis for John.
At that time, we knew, A, he had lost a lot of blood, B, that his voice was probably going to be different because of the amount of injury that was sustained in the voice box, and we didn't know if his voice would ever be normal again. And then C, his arm and the movement of his arm based on where that bullet went, we had no idea if that was going to come back either.
33,000 block of 72nd Street. We have multiple gunshot victims. We also have some people that are escaping through windows.
8 minutes after the first shot, 3 medics came running to the scene. Gripping his throat, John called out to warn them.
Army specialist Ivan Lopez opened fire, killing 3 people and wounding 16 others.
Confronted by military police in a parking lot, he then turned the gun on himself.
They believe specialist Ivan Lopez had an argument with a fellow soldier before the shooting.
The suspect had been evaluated for post-traumatic stress disorder and was receiving treatment for depression and anxiety.
Attacked at home, a Green Berets survival story of the Fort Hood shooting. Captain John Arroyo Jr. joins us now. He's captain retired. And John, it's good of you to join us this hour. First of all, I have to say, and we say this quite a bit when we talk to veterans who have served in the U.S. military and certainly in harm's way, to thank you so much for your service, because you get it. You understand that freedom matters, and people living in our nation, they matter. But on that day that you were attacked, along with so many others there at Fort Hood, did you feel that your life mattered?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me say thank you for allowing me to be here. And it is an honor. And you're worth my service, and so was the American people. And so, yes, they matter. We went to war for a nation, but when we fought for the men and women to the left and right of us. But to answer your question, yes, my life mattered. But what caused me to fight when my life poured out on the ground, I really wasn't thinking about me. I began to think about my family. I began to think about my wife and my children. And like so many veterans, we go to war, again, for a nation. But what keeps us going is knowing that we're going to make it back to our children, to our loved ones, to our spouses. And so as I was on the ground, my life did matter, but really what I was concerned about was my family.
Yeah. Spoken like a man who truly loves his family, and obviously as a member of the Green Beret, you are taught and trained to love your, not only love your country, but love your fellow brothers and sisters in arms and in harm's way. So that day, you're in harm's way. Take me over the circumstances of what unfolded that day, and just take me through that again, if you can relive that without going through the trauma that it caused.
Yeah, no, actually, I thank you for asking, because it's this message and this experience is to help others. It was 4:00 in the afternoon on the base Fort Hood, as you mentioned, and I was getting out of my car. I'd parked at my unit headquarters, and I had to run into the supply office there in the headquarters office about 4:00 before everybody started leaving for the day. And so I parked my car and I exit my vehicle and I start stepping away, and instantly, only feet away from my vehicle, I hear shots fired. And I heard those shots to my 1 o'clock. So just so your listeners would understand, is I'm looking towards my 1 o'clock down a road that divided my organization, which is a medical organization, from a transportation unit. And so I'm looking down this road, and a vehicle comes from that road that I'm looking at, and it comes in front of me. But, when we go to the mall, the supermarket, when we're on base and a vehicle pulls in a parking lot, that's not uncommon. No one thinks that they're in danger in those moments. And no one ever thinks that they're in danger on base. Like, who would ever think that on a military installation that they have to fight for their life? Not me, and especially someone that's been to combat 3 times as a former Green Beret. I never thought that I would have to, that my life would be in danger by a fellow service member, but that's exactly what was happening. What I was hearing was this service member, his name is Ivan Lopez. He was driving down the road that I was looking down, and he was shooting at everybody that was standing outside their workplace in the back of their work building. And that's actually what I was hearing. So when he pulls up in front of me, I see him and I acknowledge him, but I turned my attention away from him because I assumed that the vehicle that I looked at was just going to keep going. And I turned my head back to the 1 o'clock after I acknowledged him in the vehicle, and the next shot I heard ripped through my throat. That day I took a .45 caliber that severed my jugular vein, went through my voice box, and traveled into my right shoulder. He drove off. He didn't stick around to figure out what was going to happen to me next. He probably just assumed that was a kill shot. For your listeners that do hunting and they're avid, weapon experts, a .45 to the throat is for most people is an instant death sentence.
Absolutely.
And I remember thinking to myself, am I shot? Because I didn't feel any pain. There was nothing that immediately told me that I was shot, except for all in that moment, the air in my lungs just escaped, and then just the mass amounts of blood. And I'm not trying to be too gory, but that's just the reality. All of a sudden, blood just started pouring from my neck. And so I just turn away from him, and I don't fall on the ground, which most people would assume would have happened. But I head back towards my car, just trying to get away from him. And it was there that I finally collapsed, only just trying to get back to my vehicle, trying to get away. And I fall on the floor, and my life is pouring out. And this is what I share, because, see, my dad died when I was 5 years old, and I didn't realize how much not having a dad in my life affected me. So I ran around looking for a dad my entire life. I went out looking for a dad until I realized I had a father. I got into gangs at a young age because I was looking for approval, not because I needed community, but because I needed people to tell me how cool I was, because I never was affirmed by my dad. And then when I became a Green Beret, initially I didn't want to be a Green Beret. I just wanted to tell people I wanted to be a Green Beret so they would give me all their fanfare, right? And so, and all that was the root of never being affirmed by my dad, never hearing I love you and I'm proud of you. So I needed people to tell me that they were proud of me. So the world would tell you, if you have this, then you have life. If you have this much money, then you've made it. If you have these letters behind your name, John, you've made it. And so what I'm saying to you is that when I was on the ground and my life was pouring out, the stuff that the world told me if I had it, that stuff never came to mind. I didn't think 1 second about the likes on social media. I didn't think about how much money I had in my account. I didn't think about all the titles and the badges and all the things at the military. If you have this, then you are someone that people look up to. What I thought about in those moments were the people that I sacrificed most. And the only thing that came to mind is when I thought I only had seconds to live, were the people that I sacrificed most. And it was my children and it was my wife. And in that moment, I hear this audible voice, John, get up or your wife will die. I couldn't, I didn't know what was going on in that moment.
Wait, John, get up or your wife will die?
That's exactly what I heard. And I actually heard it twice. And the second time I heard it, I heard in a more stern tone. But here's why. If we walk into the homes of the American people today, we would get a backdoor view, right, of what's going on in their life. This is what was happening in my life. 6 months before I was shot, when we left from North Carolina, and we were new to Fort Hood, Texas. We had only been there 5 months. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law both died 9 days apart, 6 months before I was shot. 2 years before that, my brother-in-law died in a hunting accident. And so my wife had lost her mother, her father, and her brother in such a short period of time. And when I was an angry, mean, drunk Green Beret back in the day, coming back and forth from deployment, I used to beat my family down with my tongue. I didn't put my hands on them, but I could take my frustrations. I can bring war back into my home. And that's exactly what I did. And my wife during that time was a 2-time suicide survivor. So what am I saying to you? Is that God stepped into that moment and said, John, if you don't get up, your wife is going to take her life. And this time she will not make a mistake.